In 2001, a giant bookstore chain handed the keys to its entire online business to the one company that would eventually destroy it. Borders had thousands of physical locations and real brand power, the kind most retailers would kill for. But building e-commerce felt hard, expensive, and outside what the company knew how to do well. So Borders signed a deal, letting Amazon run Borders.com for 7 years. 7 years. Think about how long that actually is in internet time. Long enough for an entire industry to be built, tested, refined, and won. Here is exactly what that deal handed over, and it is worth being precise about it, because the precision is what makes the mistake so stark. Every online sale, every customer email, every bit of purchase data went straight to Amazon's systems instead of Borders' own. Not a summary, not an occasional report, the actual raw data flowing continuously, in real time, into infrastructure that Borders did not own and could not see inside of. Borders collected a small referral fee and called it a smart partnership. From where Borders sat, this looked like a clean, sensible outsourcing decision. Skip the messy, expensive work of building an online storefront. Let the company that had already built one handle it. Collect a fee. Focus on what Borders actually knew how to do, which was running large, well-stocked physical bookstores. Picture it like a restaurant that cannot be bothered to run its own kitchen, so it lets a rival chef come in and cook every dish for 7 years straight, using the restaurant's own recipes, tasting every plate before it goes out, watching exactly which dishes customers order twice and which ones come back untouched. The restaurant keeps its name on the door and collects a small cut of every sale. Meanwhile, the rival chef is quietly learning the entire menu, the entire clientele, and the entire rhythm of the kitchen, dish by dish, night after night, for the better part of a decade. That is roughly the shape of what Borders agreed to, except instead of recipes, it was purchase histories. And instead of a chef, it was one of the most sophisticated logistics and data operations ever built. Amazon called it market research. That framing, sitting right next to Borders' framing, tells you almost everything you need to know about how differently the two companies understood what was actually happening. One side saw a vendor relationship. The other side saw a live, continuously updating window into exactly how book buyers behaved online, at scale, for free, handed over voluntarily by a competitor who did not think of Amazon as a competitor yet. While Borders focused on stores, Amazon spent those years studying exactly how book buyers browsed, searched, and repurchased online. Every search a Borders customer ran on Borders.com was a data point Amazon got to see. Every abandoned cart, every second click, every pattern of someone browsing 3 titles before buying a 4th, all of it landed inside Amazon's own systems. The same systems Amazon was simultaneously using to refine its own site, its own recommendation engine, its own understanding of what made someone actually complete a purchase instead of wandering off. Borders was not just failing to build its own e-commerce capability during those 7 years. It was actively funding, with real customer data, the company that would eventually replace it. By 2008, Borders finally took its website back, but it was starting from zero against a competitor who now understood its own customers better than it did. Sit with that sentence for a moment, because it is the entire story compressed into one line. Borders had owned those customers. Borders had built the brand, stocked the shelves, run the loyalty programs, earned the trust. And yet, by the time it got its own online operation back, the company on the other side of that deal, the one that had spent 7 years quietly absorbing everything there was to learn about Borders' own customer base, knew that customer base more intimately than Borders itself did. That is not a normal competitive disadvantage. That is closer to having handed over your own playbook, annotated, for free, for the better part of a decade. 3 years later, Borders filed for bankruptcy and closed every store for good, every single location. A chain that once had thousands of stores and genuine cultural relevance simply ceased to exist. Notice too what did not happen during those 7 years. Borders did not lose a price war. It did not get outspent on marketing. It did not lose because Amazon offered cheaper books or faster shipping in some way. Borders simply could not match with its existing footprint. Those would all be familiar, almost forgivable ways to lose a competitive battle. the kind every retailer half expects to face eventually. What actually happened was quieter and stranger than any of that. Borders lost a fight it did not know it was in, against an opponent it had voluntarily invited into its own house to watch how the business actually worked, day after day, for years, before that opponent ever had to compete on price or speed at all. It is tempting to tell this story as a simple tale of a big company failing to adapt to the internet, one more entry in the long list of retailers that missed the shift to e-commerce. But that version of the story is too generous to what actually happened, and it lets the real lesson slip past unnoticed. The company did not lose to Amazon in a fair fight. It handed Amazon the exact data and infrastructure needed to win, then wondered why the ground had shifted under it. This is the part worth sitting with directly, because it changes the entire moral of the story. Borders was not simply slow. Slow companies who never engage with a threat at all sometimes still survive by accident, propped up by inertia or loyal customers who never bother to leave. Borders was not that. Borders actively participated in building the very capability that ended up erasing it, and did so willingly, under contract, for a fee, believing the whole time that it was making a smart, efficient decision. Executives at the time called the outsourcing deal efficient, and by the narrow accounting logic available to them in 2001, it probably was efficient, in the short term, on a spreadsheet. It let Borders skip the cost and risk of building technology in-house. Building a serious e-commerce operation from scratch in 2001 was genuinely difficult and genuinely expensive, with real risk of failure. Handing it to a company that had already solved those problems looked, on paper, like exactly the kind of smart resource allocation a well-run company should make. Focus on your core competency. Outsource the rest to specialists. That is standard, sensible management advice, the kind taught in business schools and repeated in boardrooms constantly. And it is not wrong most of the time. But here is the part nobody in that boardroom seemed to catch. And it is the pivot the entire story hinges on. That framing missed the real cost, giving away the one capability, quietly becoming the entire industry. The efficiency logic that governs most outsourcing decisions assumes the function being outsourced is a fixed cost, a chore, something that exists today in roughly the same shape it will exist in tomorrow. Payroll processing, building maintenance, catering, outsource those, and you are almost certainly making a safe, sensible trade, because those functions are not about to become the defining battleground of your entire industry. E-commerce infrastructure in 2001 looked, to most retail executives, like it belonged in that same bucket. A cost center, a chore, something you handle efficiently and move past so you can get back to the real business of running stores. It was not that. It was the opposite of that. It was the one function, out of everything Borders did, that was about to become the single most important asset any book retailer could own. And Borders handed the entire thing, data included, to the one company positioned to notice exactly how important it was about to become, and to use those 7 years to build an unbeatable lead while Borders was not even in the race. Here is where this gets genuinely useful for anyone running a team or a function today, because the lesson for managers has nothing to do with bookstores. It is about spotting which function looks like a cost center today, but is actually tomorrow's core competency. That is a much harder question than it sounds, because the whole reason Borders got this wrong is that the distinction is genuinely difficult to see in the moment. Nobody in 2001 had the benefit of hindsight. E-commerce was young, unproven, expensive to build, and easy to categorize as a distraction from the real business. The mistake was not stupidity. It was a completely reasonable-looking decision that turned out to be catastrophically wrong, which is a far scarier category of mistake than an obviously bad one, because it does not feel like a mistake while you are making it. So how does a manager actually tell the difference, in real time, before hindsight makes it obvious? One useful test is to ask what you are really handing over, not just what task you are handing over. Borders was not just handing over website maintenance. It was handing over the complete record of how its customers actually behaved, at the most granular level available, continuously, for years. Anytime an outsourcing decision includes handing a vendor deep, ongoing visibility into your own customers, your own operational patterns, or your own decision-making process, that is a different category of decision than outsourcing a task that produces no lasting insight for the vendor at all. A payroll processor does not learn how to steal your customers by processing your payroll. A company running your entire digital storefront absolutely does learn how to steal your customers, because your customers are the entire point of a digital storefront. A third test worth running is simply asking who else wants this function and why. If a vendor is eager to take a piece of your business off your hands for a modest fee, that eagerness is itself a data point. Sometimes it genuinely reflects specialization. A vendor that has built real efficiency in a narrow, well-understood task and is happy to sell that efficiency at scale. But sometimes that eagerness reflects something else entirely. The vendor has already noticed something about the long-term value of that function that you have not noticed yet. Amazon did not offer to run Borders.com out of charity, and it did not do it purely for a referral fee either. A company does not spend 7 years running someone else's storefront unless it sees something in that arrangement worth far more than the fee involved. Any manager facing a similarly eager offer to take a boring function off their plate should ask, directly, what the other side gets out of it that is not visible in the contract's stated terms. Another useful test, and this is the one worth remembering longest, is to ask whether the function in question is trending toward becoming more central to the industry over time or less. In 2001, retail was clearly, visibly, trending toward digital. That was not a secret or a hard prediction to make, even then. What was harder to see was that the function currently labeled as a cost center, e-commerce infrastructure, was exactly the function riding that trend upward, becoming more central every year, while things like physical store square footage were trending the other direction. Before outsourcing anything purely for efficiency, ask what you are really handing over. Is it a chore, or is it the future of the business? That question sounds almost too simple to matter, but Borders never actually asked it, and a company with thousands of stores and a well-known brand ceased to exist a decade later, partly because of that gap. This is not a one-off story either, which is exactly why it is worth studying instead of filing away as a strange historical footnote. Plenty of well-known companies from that same era made a version of the same mistake, treating a genuinely emerging core capability as a peripheral technical detail that could safely be handed to somebody else, or ignored entirely, while a smaller, hungrier competitor built the future in plain sight. The specifics differ every time. The shape of the mistake does not. A company that is comfortable and dominant in its current business looks at an unproven, expensive, technically awkward new capability, decides it is not really their business, and lets someone else build it instead, right up until that capability turns out to be the entire business. What makes the Borders version so unusually clean, as a case study, is how directly the company handed over the exact mechanism of its own undoing. Most companies that get disrupted this way at least lose slowly, out in the open market, watching a competitor's product get better year over year while their own stays still. Borders did not even get the dignity of losing in public. It lost the 7 years quietly, behind the scenes, inside a contract it had signed voluntarily, and described to its own shareholders as a smart, efficient move. Nobody outside the deal could have watched it happening in real time and known how much was actually being transferred. That is what makes it worth remembering specifically, rather than as one more entry in a long list of companies that miss the internet. There is a broader pattern here worth naming plainly, because it extends well past bookstores or even past retail entirely. Every organization has some function that currently looks boring, expensive, and outside its core focus, and is quietly becoming the actual battleground of its industry. It might be data infrastructure. It might be a customer relationship platform. It might be some analytical capability that looks like overhead today and looks like the entire competitive advantage in 10 years. The dangerous version of this mistake never looks like recklessness. It looks like discipline. It looks like a management team wisely focusing on its core strengths and outsourcing the rest to specialists, which is good advice, right up until the function being outsourced turns out to be the one that was going to define the next decade. Keep the parts that will matter most in 10 years, even when they are inconvenient now. That is a genuinely uncomfortable piece of advice to actually follow, because the inconvenient parts are inconvenient precisely because they are hard, expensive, and outside what a company currently does well. Building e-commerce in-house in 2001 would have cost Borders real money and real organizational pain, with no guarantee it would have worked. Outsourcing it felt safe. It was not safe. It was the single most consequential decision the company made, dressed up as a boring efficiency move, and nobody in the room recognized it for what it was until it was far too late to undo. It also helps to build a simple habit around review cycles. So this kind of decision does not just get made once and forgotten. Anytime a function gets outsourced for efficiency, put a standing reminder on the calendar, a year out, 2 years out, to revisit the question of whether that function has grown in strategic importance since the original decision was made. Borders signed a 7-year deal and, as far as the public record shows, never seriously revisited the terms until the contract's natural endpoint forced the issue. By then, the gap had already become close to unbridgeable. A shorter review cycle, even an uncomfortable one that reopens a settled decision, costs far less than discovering 7 years later that the ground shifted entirely while nobody was watching. So the next time a decision gets framed as simple efficiency, worth outsourcing because it is not core to what your company does today, pause on that word today. Borders did not lose because it made a bad decision in a moment of crisis. It lost because it made a perfectly reasonable decision, 7 years earlier, about something that only looked unimportant because nobody had asked the right question about where the industry was actually heading. Tap follow if you want more stories like this one.